First, I'd like to welcome everyone here, and on behalf of the Sally Shorten gang, it's great to get all of the Shortens together in one place, particularly this, what I would say is a unique and joyous occasion. You know, from 1916 to 2016, 100 years, particularly the connection with the Shorten E. Kelly family, it's a tremendous occasion. Firstly, I'd like to call on Uncle Tony, the boss. Tony.
I hope actually from tonight onwards that every one of the Shortens here, or even the extended family from the Shortens, will learn a bit more about my mother. Super lady. She might have been about 5 foot in height, but to me and my brothers, that she was 9 foot tall.
We know from the 1911 census that in Dolphin's Barn, one of the people in the house on the particular night of the census was Margaret Kelly. She was 12 years of age and she was down as a scholar, which obviously means a schoolgirl. When you consider that her background, the family background, was from Wexford, growing up, she was bound to have heard from her Wexford people all about 1798, because that was something for them to be proud of. But we shouldn't forget as well that the Wexford people rose up in 1916 as well. It wasn't just Dublin and Galway and Donabate and Skerries and the Battle of Ashburn and all that. But in Enniscorthy, they proclaimed a republic there too, and they held on to some of the buildings in that town for several days.
Walking all the days.
When you look at the theme of this slideshow that we have here, and I mean this sincerely, that the theme here, which is related to the 1916, the 100 years commemoration, I think if you look at it and think of the connection that we have with the 1916 Rising, it's actually through the women of Ireland. Here, because really behind every good man and behind every good country is a good woman. And you can see that in my grandmother, and she was a tough cookie. Austin and I remember playing in the snow one time. I think I still have the mark on my ass. But they always looked after the family, and they always looked after the loved ones. So the theme there and the connection between Margaret, the grandmother, and the women of Ireland is not lost.
And sang a song for Ireland.
I was actually thinking maybe we should have spoken when everybody was eating, because that's probably the quietest time we'll ever get you together. What I would like to do is, first I'd like to welcome everyone here, and on behalf of the Sally Shorten gang, it's great to get all of the Shortens together in one place, particularly this, what I would say is a unique and joyous occasion. You know, from 1916 to 2016, 100 years, particularly the connection with the Shorten E. Kelly family, it's a tremendous occasion. So it's a very relaxed, casual family affair. It's not too structured. What we'd like to do is we're going to call on a couple of people to say a few words, and we're also going to invite some people to play music and sing some songs, and then hopefully then everybody will enjoy that, and then we continue to enjoy the evening. So firstly, I'd like to call on Uncle Tony, the boss.
This year is a special year. It's a year of Ireland's independence and the whole lot. And I know we're honouring all the men of 1916. And you have Connolly and you have Pearse and Plunkett. But they're all famous men. And Margaret Kelly, to me, and to the Shorten family, is a very, very famous name as far as we're concerned. Because every short here has a little bit of Margaret Kelly, which was a tremendous woman, great woman for our country, and I'm very proud of it, and Austin very proud. And just to say too, Austin and myself are very, very thankful to the Shorten family that arranged tonight for us in honour of my mother, which was super, super lady. I know part of the Shorten with my mother. She was only 5 foot, tough cookie and all that. And a lot of, can I just say, my nieces and nephews were bear witness to the fact is she wasn't perfect, but she was a solid lady. I hope actually from tonight onwards that every one of the Shortens here, or even the extended family from the Shortens, will learn a bit more about my mother. Super lady. She might have been about 5 foot in height, but to me and my brother, that she was 9 foot tall. I can tell you that. And we're very privileged for Margaret Kelly. And I said, just to say, I had an email from a young lady about, actually I'll probably be in trouble with my own family, but that's here and there. The young lady used to send me an email and the whole lot, and it's a long time since I seen her. I've got to know one another through the emails and the whole lot. And she said to me, she just wanted to know a little bit of history about my mother. And I said, and sent her off to regarding my mother. And then I said, so John, would you like to know the history of my mother? And she sent me back an email. She said, so one Friday afternoon on my own, and I said, this is it, let's go. And I spent 3 hours about my mother, and I know some of it was very joyful. My mother was very joyful. Part of it was that she was sad, she had a sad life, but she was a brilliant, brilliant lady, and I'd like, just on us, on myself behalf, I'd like to thank Mother. I love you, Mother. Thank you.
And you know, I would like to just extend Tony's gratitude, not just to the Shorten family, but also to the extended family. Yeah, it's true that, you know, for a lot of us on the Shorten side, we wouldn't be here, but for Margaret Kelly, Nee, Shorten Kelly, depends which way you look at it. But what I would also say is that, you know, to all the people that surrounds and extends beyond the Shorten family, the Whelans in particular, on my man's side, it's great to see them here. And then a lot of close friends that we have, and looking at Nick McGardle and looking at Vivian. It's to see that network and that group of friendship that we have, that it's really fantastic. And it's great to get together when it isn't, God forbid, a funeral or something like that. And so it's really good to have everyone here. There's 2 other things I'd like to just say is, when you look at the theme of this slideshow that we have here, and I mean this sincerely, that the theme here, which is related to the 1916, the 100 years commemoration, I think if you look at it and think of the connection that we have with the 1916 Rising, it's actually through the women of Ireland. Yeah. They're here. Because really, behind every good man and behind every good country is a good woman. And you can see that in my grandmother, and she was a tough cookie. Austin and I remember playing in the snow one time. I think I still have the mark. The second thing I would say, I would also like to thank my family, my brothers and sisters, for helping organise this, and in particular the General. So when you look at the General, who is about 5 foot, she is a no-nonsense General. And it's funny, you know, not only, you know, do you get the good looks from your ancestors and from your grandmother Shorten, you also get the same characteristics, personalities and strengths. Small but solid as a rock. So thank you, Alison, for everything that you've done. And she's wearing the uniform. This is the long haired Amber. Do what you're told. Now we're going to call on Jack Lynch, who's a friend of Austin and Deirdre and the family, and he's going to talk to us a little bit around this commemoration of the 2016. Jack, please.
Thanks very much. I have to explain, I'm the outsider here, obviously. The reason I'm here is, like many a person who needed a good mechanic, I found a good mechanic in Austin. And what a great name for a mechanic. And as time went on, I'm sure I can say he became my friend. So not only am I saying I have a mechanic who's a friend, but I can say I have a friend who's a mechanic. And he's been a good friend to my friends because when they've been in trouble with their cars, he's helped out. So I'm going to say a few things, and it's all based on bits of research that were done by Suzanne and also by Alison, who got on to Tony. And this might be I'm sure it'd be of interest. Some of you will have heard a lot of it before, or some of it before, but there's still more to learn, and this is only the start of a project to dig into this history of this woman that you're here to celebrate tonight. You know, there's a lot of sources where you can look for information about your family, and I'll just go way back to the start of the Shorten family name. And from what's been found out, the Shortens were a family who came to, during the Munster plantation, came to Bandon in County Cork and West Cork themselves, and a number of other Puritan families. Now, I know Bandon myself. I go through it every year because I'm on the way down to Cape Clear Island, where there's a great storytelling festival. And the funny things that history throws up, the mainland port for Cape Clear is Baltimore. And of course there were other planters or settlers came and settled in the town of Baltimore. The Munster plantation was 1620, but in 1631 there was an attack. Baltimore was attacked and sacked by Barbary pirates, believe it or not. Pirates from Algeria and a few Dutch mercenaries, and they stole away 108 of these local settlers. There was a few natives as well taken away, and only 3 of the 108 people ever made it back to Ireland. The rest of them ended up as slaves. The men probably rowing, in the boats, getting the lash of the whip. Some of those women, they ended up in the harems of the Sultan of Algeria. And but that gave them a great power too, and they made their name that way. I don't know if you call them sultanas, but we won't go into that one. And the Shorten family, from what can be found out from what's been dug up by Suzanne and a friend of hers in UCD, Mary McAuliffe, and I got a few pointers from a friend of mine, Katrina Crowe. Katrina Crowe was responsible for putting the censuses up online, great woman in the archive. But from what we seem to understand is that most of these, we know the Shorten family, probably because of intermarriage and that, the Shorten males, the one who kept the name, would have converted to Catholicism. And this would have been before the year 1750, which wasn't yesterday nor the day before. So there's a number of sources where you can find out information. Anybody can find out information about their family and their family history. And of course, there's parish records and there's commercial records and land records and all that. But the main thing, I suppose, is the census. And tomorrow night, we're all going to have to fill out the census ourselves so that our descendants know what we were doing tomorrow night, if we know ourselves yet. Anyway, so we know from the 1911 census that in Dolphin's Barn, one of the people in the house on the particular night of the census was Margaret Kelly. She was 12 years of age, and she was down as a scholar, which obviously means a schoolgirl. Now, when you consider that her background, the family background, was from Wexford, growing up, she was bound to have heard from her Wexford people all about 1798, because that was something for them to be proud of. But we shouldn't forget as well that the Wexford people rose up in 1916 as well. It wasn't just Dublin and Galway and Donabate and Skerries and the Battle of Ashburn and all that. But in Enniscorthy, they proclaimed a republic there too, and they held on to some of the buildings in that town for several days. Now, it's amazing when you go into these things and try and start finding out information and that. My own late sister and my cousin and myself, we've been looking into the censuses, things you can find out about grandparents on either side. My own grandfather, he wrote down some notes and that. I just want to tell you something that he wrote that I think reflects on this whole effort to find out about your ancestors and that. He wrote a thing, and it's in his papers, in the folklore department or whatever they are, and he says, I don't think there are many people alive in Ireland that can say, like I can, and he says, I'm writing this in 1939, that as a young boy, I remember playing with a man and hearing stories from him. That boy was my grandfather, that's my grandfather's grandfather, and that man was 13 years of age at the time of the 1798 rebellion. You know, so my grandfather died when I was a teenager. I remember him well. He, as a kid, remembers his own grandfather, who, as a kid, was alive at 1798. So it's like you look over your shoulder and history is just a fortnight away, you know. So Margaret Kelly, she would have been 15, maybe 16 at the time of 1916, and she was obviously, you know, had a nationalist spirit. And like the rest of people in the country, especially Dublin, the executions that happened across the road there, you know, obviously, meant something to her. You know, the great mistake that the British made by, you know, shooting those 16 men, shooting the leaders, putting them into lime graves, you know, and that changed the general outlook, you know. But I think she must have been nationalistic before that, because we found out from something that Tony was telling Alison, and this would probably happen by, you know, around 1916. According to her sister Josie, she got up on the pulpit in the church and told the people in the congregation they should get out of there and fight to free Ireland. And there's some spirit there, huh? So she was too young to be involved in 1916, but in 1921, she was around 21 years of age, and she was involved in the War of Independence. And all that came, of course, from 1916. And I'll tell you a joke about 1916, just to lighten things here a bit. A friend of mine used to tell this story about 1916. It's sometime in the middle of Easter week, and a woman is making her way down Sackville Street, O'Connell Street as we know it, in the middle of all the bombardment, stepping over dead horses that had belonged to the British Lancers and that. She makes it up to the GPO and stands under one of the windows and starts shouting out, "Jem! Is Jem in there? I'm looking for my husband, Jem!" Now a figure comes to this sandbagged window and he shows himself in profile, probably P.H. Pearce with the gammy eye, and he shouts out to this woman out on the street, "Cod ta uit, no K ta uit. What do you want, or who are you looking for?" And she says, "I'm looking for my husband, Jem." Pearce goes away, and finally Jem comes to the window and he says, "Maggie, away, you'll be killed, you'll be destroyed. There's dead Tommies and dead or old sorts littering the streets here, and they're bombarding the place. She says, all right, Jem, all I want you to do is throw me out a few shillings or a few postage stamps. I have to feed the children, you know. He says, go away, Maggie, you'll be killed, you'll be destroyed. They're shelling the city from the bay. All right, she says, all right, I'm going, Jem. But listen, tell us this much, Jem. Are you going into your walk in the morning? So there's always a funny story. Now, you know, a lot of people claim that they or their relations were in the GPO. If it was true, the GPO wouldn't have held the thousands that were in there during 1916. And another little story about two fellas, old codgers at the time, they meet up and one of them says, look, where were you in 1916? And the other fella says, in 1916, I was in Liberty Hall. You couldn't have been in Liberty Hall. When they shelled it to smithereens, there was only one person in there. That was the caretaker. You're not telling me you were the caretaker. No, I wasn't the caretaker. So you're telling me you were in Liberty Hall? Yeah. Where in Liberty Hall were you? I was in the basement. What do you mean you were in the basement? I was in the Jacks. You were in the Jacks. Yeah, I was. You know, the Union Jacks. Anyway, we get away with that one. But we know from this census that she's living in Dolphin's Barn and that. And now we have the centenary of 1916. And I think that, things have gone very well so far. There's been a lot of dignity to everything that happened and some amazing events, the one over across the river in Collins's Barracks, the great choir thing and the orchestra, 100 years a nation and all that. There's stuff still happening. Tomorrow's the actual date of the uprising, and there's going to be something in Croker, and I'm going to go up to Merrion Square. There's a big thing there with Stephen Ray and Adrian Dunbar, Mary Black and Don Baker and that, and then there's a march to the GPO. But so there was a bit of a worry that 1966, when I was a teenager, it was a much different thing. I think people put the effort in this time. And you had your naysayers, people who said it wasn't a legitimate, democratic, uprising, people like John Bruton and Bob Geldof and the like. But I think Michael D. Higgins countered those arguments, do you know what I mean? If there hadn't been an uprising, Home Rule wouldn't have meant much on that. So, now another thing, and I think it was sort of touched on before this, when you're trying to find out about people like, Margaret, who's up there beside her Cumann na Món medal there, and I see her, and what a good-looking woman. I can see where most of you get your good looks from. But the thing you have to remember, and I'm sure I need to say this to the women, the whole thing of a hidden women's history, Women, they tried to write women out, but when women went to get the pension, they had very little chance of getting the pension in the way the men who fought did get the pension. There's copies of her application to the Department of Defence for her Cumann na Món medal, and she did at least get that. But it's as per usual, the women are often written out. But earlier on in the year, there was a big kerfuffle in the Abbey Theatre when they talked about the programme they had, and very little women involved. And all the women got together and said, all these actresses and stage managers in the Abbey, they fought on the streets, so things were changed and it became a big kerfuffle around the world. Meryl Streep twittering to say, yeah, we were standing up for these Irish actresses as well. So, various sources that I mentioned. Now, one main source was lost because, the Custom House was burnt down during the War of Independence, and that was in May of 1921. I have no idea whether Margaret had any hand in doing that, but we do know that she spent time across the river in Mountjoy. And another source is the Bureau of Military History, and they've been doing great work. But again, the last thing they're getting around to is to do the research on Cumann na Món. And when they do get it together, there'll be a website about the people who were in that organisation, and there'll be more things to be learned about Margaret at that point. And there's a few other sources that could be looked at. So, you know, to me, the whole thing about 1916 is the proclamation. You know, it's a very idealistic thing. And I think looking back on it, you know, my feeling is that the ideals of that proclamation were betrayed since then, you know, especially like the bit about cherishing all the children of the nation and all that. So I think what's been happening recently has been giving people more courage to recognise what happened in 1916. And Margaret's story is part of that. 16 and the War of Independence, you know. You know, in the proclamation, they call on the soldiers, you know, to be honourable soldiers and all that. And the reason it ended was when Pearson Connolly realised that they saw civilians being mown down in Moore Street, and they knew it was time to, you know, to surrender on that. And of course, I think of it, 30 yards from here, James Connolly, who's in the hospital there, and he's brought down that avenue in there to be propped up, not in a chair, but on his stretcher, to be shot in the Stonebreakers yard. So, it's, in a way, it was easy, you know, to celebrate and to commemorate 1916. We still have to commemorate the War of Independence and then the Civil War, and that's going to be much harder. But I think nations have to face up to these things. I'll just say one or two things more. You know, when as a storyteller, when I'm working with elderly people, say during the Bealtaine Festival, or sometimes I'm in hospitals, or, you know, drawing stories from older people with dementia and all that, I'm always reminded of a saying. There's Mali in West Africa. They have a storytelling tradition of the griot, very like the Shanakis in Ireland, very like the storytellers in the Arabian Nights, the people behind that, or Marrakesh, or the Native American Indians, or the Aboriginals, or people in other parts of Africa. And they have a saying, and it is, when an old person dies, it's as if a library has burnt down. And I think most people, certainly most people of my age, sort of think, you know, that aunt or that grandaunt, she knew about our family and our family tree and the jobs that our parents did and all that. I should have asked her, and it was too late because she's gone now. But what I'm saying is that the effort that Suzanne and Alison have put into this, I think should only be the start for the Shorten family, you know. There's more to be found out, and things like that can be found out. And it's important, like Austin there was showing me on his phone photographs of the stuff that Owen was doing, you know, building replicas of the GPO. And I think young people in Ireland today, not like in 1966, have, you know, been able to engage with history in a real way. And this is a real way, looking back on you know, on the people who came before you. So, to finish up, I'd just like to say I'm honoured to be here tonight, to be part of this salute to the woman who was one of your relations and one of our soldiers, Margaret Kelly Nee Shorten. And another thing, if I can just say, when the next generation and plenty of your lovely offspring are here, start researching or continuing the research, they will have stories to tell about Margaret Kelly Nee Shorthall to their kids and to their grandkids. Yeah. Now, thank you.
Thank you.
So just before we get into some music, Jack, I'd like to really thank you for your words there. It's really excellent the way that you can see the connection between the Shorten Nee Kelly family and how that's woven into Irish history. And I think, you know, one of the key things, you know, what Jack said was that, you know, when we lose some of our loved ones, some of these of the older, former generation, it is definitely like a library burning down. And, you know, as I said earlier on, the whole emphasis and the theme of the night is about Margaret Kelly and the women of Ireland. But it's also about the previous generation and us, you know, as the younger generation, and I'm not speaking of me, I'm speaking of the people like Marlene, is really to say thank you for the treasures that we have. 3 of those treasures that we have, and I will start with ladies first, is my mum, Sarah Shorten, and the elder women of the Shorten side, Austin, and then Tony Shorten. So we have a small gift for each. So Austin's going to present the candle to mum. And this is just a token of gratitude, just to say thank you. The candle is part of the commemoration of 1916, and it also links back to the proclamation. And like what Jack alluded to earlier on, the proclamation was unique. It was the first of its kind that recognised women. So that's especially for you, Mother, because just like Margaret Kelly, small but solid and a great heart. And then we move over to us poor slaves, soldiers, men. So I'd like Anne, if you could present to Austin, the elder lemon of the Shorten family. Thank you, Austin. Thank you. And then if we can get on to the young fella, the younger one, at least he makes us all feel down anyway. And that's the Tony Shorten. Max, thank you. So special thanks anyone, and I'm sure if we all could just give one final round of applause to the 3 elder lemons. Now for the musical entertainment, we're going to go back to the general again. Alison, if you can take it from here, and I'm done. Thank you.
Can I just say something for a moment? Just before Alison starts. Just before Alison starts to play, that I think probably on behalf of Robert and myself, because we're the only 2 other Shortens of this kind of generation, and to say thank you to our cousins this evening for organising, one, to have the wherewithal to this time, approximately this time last year, to book the Patriot Inn just beside Kilmainham Jail, and also for their generosity this evening, inviting all of us here to celebrate this occasion, to celebrate the family, and it's a wonderful occasion. And I want to say, particularly, I know the people who were particularly involved was Austin, heavily involved. I know Margaret, and I'm missing someone. And Alison, of course, who's hugely involved, the next generation. So maybe I think if everyone just
Don't
would...
forget the treasurer, Deirdre.
Oh, the treasurer, Deirdre, who I can't see, but and maybe perhaps everyone might stand and raise a glass and toast to the evening. Yes.
Another Margaret. Margaret's a still going.
And just for the younger generation, maybe for those, the actual medals are here on the table if you want to have a look for a very short time only.
I don't really know it's nice for once to know, and I know this is all. It's nice, that's my just bear with me, I don't really know. Some pride.
Go ahead.
In the breast, so black hair across the sky, living on your western shore. So summer sunsets, I asked for more. I stood by your Atlantic sea and sang a song for Ireland, talking all the days with true friends who tried to make you stay, telling jokes and blues, singing songs to pass the night away. Watch the Galway salmon run like silver dancing, doubting in the sun, living on your western shore. So summer sunsets, I asked for more. I stood by your Atlantic sea, and I sang a song for Ireland, drinking all the days in old pubs where fiddlers love to play. Someone touched the bow, he played a reel, it seemed so fine and gay. Stood on Dingle Beach and cast in wild foam, we found Atlantic bass, living on your western shore. So summer sunsets, I asked for more. I stood by your Atlantic sea and sang a song for Ireland, dreaming in the night. I saw land where no one had to fight, waking in your dawn. I saw you crying in the morning light, lying where the falcons fly. They twist and turn all in your blue sky, living on your western shore. So summer sunset, I asked for more. I stood by your Atlantic sea, and I sang a song for Ireland.
So just before we wrap up, Deborah's going to do one more song, and I'd just like to say thanks again for everybody for coming, and especially would like to thank the staff of the Patriot for laying on some lovely food and helping us organise the room. I'm sure we can give them a round of applause. And you'll also find Austin going around there shaking the glass. So thanks again, and Deborah, if you'll be closer for us.
When blossoms still bloom from each tree, when leaves are still green in December, it's then that I free. I wander her hills and her valleys, and still through my sorrow I see a land that has never known freedom, and only her rivers run free. I drink to the death of her mama, those men who'd rather have died than to live in the cold chains of bondage, to bring back the rights we're denied. Oh, where are you now when we need you? What burns where the flame used to be? Are you gone like the snow of last winter? And will only our rivers run free? How sweet is life, but we're crying. How mellow the wine, but it's dry. How fragrant the rose, but it's dying. How gentle the breeze, but it sighs. What good is in youth when it's aging? What joy is in eyes that can see? When the sorrow and sunshine and flowers, and only our rivers run free. Thanks.
Nancy, down the front.
Yeah. Very good try.
Okay, so I'm just going to attempt some Irish tunes now. I don't really play traditional music, but I said for the night that's in it, I'll definitely have to play something.
job.